Sophia Bennett gazed out the window of the luxurious first-class cabin, her small fingers gripping the boarding pass so tightly it had begun to wrinkle. At 10 years old, it was her first time flying alone. Her heart fluttered nervously, a mix of excitement and mild apprehension filling her chest. She glanced around curiously at the spacious leather seats, the perfectly folded blankets, and the gentle hum of soft music drifting through the cabin. A first-class ticket, an unexpected reward from her father, Alexander Bennett, for winning her school's public speaking contest. Her father's words echoed softly in her mind. "You deserve to experience the best, my girl." Sophia carefully tucked her backpack under the seat in front of her and straightened her pastel mule dress, making sure it looked neat. The oversized window revealed a bright sky dotted with gentle clouds. She smiled slightly to herself, feeling special and proud of what she had accomplished. Around her, other passengers were settling into their seats, some already absorbed in their laptops, others leisurely flipping through magazines. A businessman across the aisle, Franklin Montgomery, glanced briefly at Sophia, smiling kindly, then returned his gaze to the financial report he was reading. The cabin was calm and serene, and Sophia settled comfortably, confident that she belonged exactly where she was sitting. However, from the front galley, Veronica Mitchell, the chief flight attendant, had noticed the little girl sitting by herself. Veronica, a senior crew member known for maintaining strict control and rigorous discipline on board, narrowed her eyes in suspicion. Her perfectly ironed uniform, impeccable hair, and composed demeanor gave her an authoritative presence, one she wore with pride. Veronica's gaze flickered between the girl's casual attire and her luxurious surroundings, a faint scowl forming at her lips. Taking a deep breath, Veronica walked briskly down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the polished cabin floor. Passengers looked up briefly, then quickly away, sensing the tension radiating from the approaching figure. "Excuse me," Veronica said sharply, coming to a stop next to Sophia's seat. Her voice, though professionally controlled, carried an edge that immediately drew attention. "Young lady, let me see your boarding pass, please." Sophia lifted her gaze, startled at first, but then quickly offering a polite smile. "Oh yes, of course," she replied softly, handing Veronica the slightly crumpled ticket. Veronica scrutinized the boarding pass with deliberate slowness, then turned her cold eyes back toward the young passenger. "Who gave you this ticket?" she asked, her voice dripping skepticism. "My father did," Sophia answered gently, her voice remaining calm despite a growing unease inside her. "He gave it to me as a reward for doing well at school." Veronica raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow, skepticism deepening her expression. Reward or not, there must have been a mistake. First class isn't for children flying alone. Perhaps your father misunderstood. Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly, and she felt the eyes of nearby passengers shifting toward the scene unfolding. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He didn't misunderstand. I have a first-class ticket." Veronica's expression hardened. Her voice turned sharper, cutting through the cabin's tranquility. "Miss Bennett, if that's even your real name, first-class seats are reserved for passengers who belong here. Now, please stand up and come with me to economy." Sophia felt her stomach clench, humiliation threatening to engulf her. The nearby passengers now openly stared, whispers beginning to ripple down the cabin aisle. Franklin Montgomery glanced over again, his eyes troubled, but he remained silent. "But I belong here?" Sophia protested weakly, her voice barely audible. She reached out her small hand, pointing again at the boarding pass that Veronica still held. "Look, my seat number is correct. Can't you check the list or something?" "I've already seen enough," Veronica snapped back, interrupting firmly. "Please don't argue. We have other passengers to consider. Get up and follow me now." Sophia's breath caught painfully in her chest, her vision blurred slightly by tears she stubbornly refused to shed. With trembling fingers, she slowly gathered her things, feeling the weight of every gaze in the cabin pressing down upon her. Her cheeks burned with shame, but she summoned every bit of courage she had left. With as much dignity as a 10-year-old could muster, Sophia stood up, adjusted her backpack on her slender shoulders, and stepped out into the aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last, a walk of shame she didn't deserve. Passengers who had previously smiled at her now avoided eye contact, turning their heads away in uncomfortable silence. Sophia bit down hard on her lip, determined not to cry. She would not give Veronica the satisfaction of seeing her break. As they passed into economy class, the difference was stark. Crowded seats, the low murmur of tired voices, and limited space. Veronica pointed curtly at an empty seat near the back. "There, sit and stay seated." Sophia slid into the narrow seat without complaint, carefully placing her bag at her feet. As Veronica walked away briskly without another word, Sophia leaned her head against the window, swallowing back the bitter taste of humiliation. Her father had always told her that people would judge her by her strength in difficult moments. She repeated his words silently to herself, determined to show resilience. From her new seat, Sophia could see only a small patch of sky, no longer vast or comforting. Instead, it seemed distant, almost mocking. She exhaled softly, her heart still pounding painfully. She would remain strong, refusing to be defeated. Yet deep inside, she felt a sharp pang of injustice that no child should ever have to experience. Meanwhile, back in first class, passengers exchanged troubled glances. Franklin Montgomery cleared his throat, visibly unsettled. Something about the way Veronica had treated the girl didn't sit right with him. He glanced toward the galley, wondering if he should intervene or remain silent. His indecision lingered heavily, an uncomfortable guilt already beginning to form. At the front of the cabin, Veronica adjusted her uniform jacket, returning to her duties with a satisfied, authoritative air. She'd restored order, as far as she was concerned, having removed the unfit passenger from first class. Yet unknown to Veronica, seated far away in the back of the plane, Sophia quietly retrieved her phone from her backpack. Hands still trembling slightly, she carefully typed a short message. "Daddy, something happened on the plane. They made me move from my seat. They said I don't belong in first class." She paused, her finger hovering over the send button. With one firm tap, the message was sent. Sophia leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes briefly. Unbeknownst to Veronica Mitchell, her arrogant judgment had set in motion a chain of events she could never have anticipated. At 35,000 feet, a silent storm was brewing, one powerful enough to shake the very foundations of her meticulously constructed authority. And justice was only a matter of time. Sophia Bennett's heart pounded uncomfortably in her chest as she clutched her phone, staring at the message she had just sent. The hum of the plane engines filled her ears, a steady reminder that she was thousands of feet above the ground, far away from her father, Alexander Bennett, and the security he represented. She gazed out the window into the endless expanse of clouds, hoping desperately for the reassuring vibration of her phone. Seconds felt like minutes, each one dragging out painfully. Her chest tightened, anxiety clawing at the edges of her thoughts. Suddenly, the phone vibrated sharply in her small hand, startling her. She unlocked the screen immediately, relief flooding her veins as she read her father's reply. "Sophia, stay calm. Tell me your flight number, I will handle this." Sophia quickly typed her response, her tiny fingers moving rapidly over the screen. As soon as she sent the flight details, she leaned back against the seat, taking deep, slow breaths. She knew her father was powerful. After all, he owned Bennett Airlines, the very company whose plane she was sitting on right now. If anyone could fix this situation, she trusted that he could. Miles away, inside the executive suite of Bennett Airlines headquarters, Alexander Bennett read his daughter's message, his jaw clenching in anger. He was a composed man, known throughout the industry for his calm under pressure and decisive leadership. But this insult directed at his daughter? tested every ounce of his legendary self-control. Sophia was the most important person in his life, and the thought of her being publicly humiliated on one of his own aircraft ignited a fury deep inside him. He set down his phone and inhaled deeply, forcing himself into composure. Calmness was key. He picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a direct line, waiting patiently until a professional voice answered from thousands of feet in the sky. "This is Captain Marcus Donovan speaking." The voice was steady, authoritative, and professional. "Captain Donovan, this is Alexander Bennett." Alexander responded sharply, not wasting any time. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We have a situation on board your aircraft that needs immediate attention." There was a brief pause, a slight shift in tone from the captain's voice, more attentive, cautious now. "Yes, Mr. Bennett. Please inform me of the situation." "My daughter, Sophia Bennett, seated in first class, was removed unjustly from her seat by your flight attendant, Veronica Mitchell," Alexander explained, maintaining a controlled yet intense tone. "This is completely unacceptable and violates company protocol. I need you to address this immediately. Connect me via video link directly to Veronica. I expect her full explanation and an immediate apology to my daughter." Captain Donovan paused briefly, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. "Understood, Mr. Bennett. I'll handle this personally." Alexander ended the call sharply, leaning back into his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. This was no longer just a father's anger. This was about justice, integrity, and the fundamental values upon which his airline had been built. Back aboard Flight BA-37, Captain Marcus Donovan replaced the intercom with a heavy sigh, adjusting his uniform sharply before summoning the chief flight attendant. "Veronica Mitchell to the cockpit immediately," he announced firmly through the internal communications system, the cool command echoing slightly within the plane's tense silence. Back in first class, Veronica was arranging a drink cart, blissfully unaware of the storm about to strike. Hearing her name summoned directly by the captain caused a ripple of uncertainty through her otherwise confident demeanor. She smoothed her uniform nervously, composing herself before moving briskly toward the cockpit. Curious eyes followed her as she passed, passengers sensing an unusual tension unfolding. As Veronica entered the cockpit, she saw Captain Donovan's face, stoic, unreadable. Beside him, on a small screen mounted above the cockpit controls, the face of Alexander Bennett appeared, eyes piercing, expression dangerously calm. "Ms. Mitchell?" Captain Donovan said formally, indicating the screen. "Mr. Alexander Bennett, owner of Bennett Airlines, requires a direct explanation from you concerning a serious incident aboard this flight." Veronica felt the blood drain from her face, her heartbeat accelerating wildly. Her throat went dry, panic bubbling beneath her professional exterior. She managed to nod stiffly. "Of course," she murmured weakly, turning toward the screen. Alexander Bennett's eyes met hers coldly, his voice as icy as his stare. "Miss Mitchell, please explain why you humiliated my daughter by forcibly removing her from her assigned first-class seat, despite her possessing a valid ticket." Veronica's composure crumbled quickly under Alexander's penetrating gaze. "Mr. Bennett, I'm terribly sorry if there was a misunderstanding, but first-class seats are typically reserved." Alexander cut her off, his voice becoming even colder, sharper. "Reserved for whom, Ms. Mitchell? Reserved for passengers you personally deem worthy based on your own biased judgment?" "No, I wasn't intending..." Veronica stammered, desperation creeping into her voice. She had handled dozens of difficult passengers before, always confidently, always firmly in control. But she had never faced someone as powerful and direct as Alexander Bennett. Her breathing became shallow, her pulse hammering in her temples. "You weren't intending what, exactly?" Alexander pressed relentlessly. "You made an assumption based on appearance and age. That is not only profoundly inappropriate, it directly contradicts the core values of Bennett Airlines. Are you prepared to accept responsibility for this? Veronica stood frozen, realizing too late the seriousness of her mistake. Captain Donovan glanced briefly at her, clearly signaling that she had no support here. She was alone, cornered, with nowhere to hide. Alexander's voice turned sternly authoritative. This is not a request, Miss Mitchell. It is a direct order. You will immediately return to Sophia Bennett, apologize, clearly, loudly, and sincerely before the entire cabin, and then escort her respectfully back to her original seat. Failure to do so will result in immediate termination upon landing and possible legal action. Have I made myself clear? Veronica's vision blurred momentarily as humiliation and fear surged through her. Never in her career had she been so publicly reprimanded, her authority stripped so brutally. Her mouth was dry as she nodded silently. Answer clearly, Ms. Mitchell, Alexander demanded. Yes, Mr. Bennett, Veronica finally managed, her voice barely audible. I understand. Alexander nodded sharply, his eyes never leaving hers. Do it now, he commanded before the video call abruptly ended. Captain Donovan turned his gaze toward her, his voice quiet but firm. I suggest you handle this professionally and without further delay. Mr. Bennett is not someone you wish to further upset. Veronica swallowed hard, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she stepped out of the cockpit, feeling the weight of every passenger's gaze on her. Her heart was racing, panic clawing at her chest, humiliation already beginning to consume her pride. As she slowly walked back down the aisle toward economy, each step a struggle, Veronica knew she had no choice but to face the child she had unjustly wronged, to stand before everyone and publicly admit her devastating mistake. Unbeknownst to her, the entire cabin had already heard whispers about the incident, anticipation building quietly. And Sophia Bennett, seated quietly at the back of the plane, looked up as Veronica approached, her eyes steady, composed, and calm. At 35,000 feet, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Veronica Mitchell's heart was thundering violently in her chest as she stepped slowly down the narrow aisle toward the economy cabin. Every careful step felt unbearably heavy, weighed down by the knowledge of what she was about to do. Her polished black heels, which earlier signified her authority, now echoed like the drums of judgment. Passengers glanced up as she passed, sensing the gravity in her demeanor. Veronica's usual air of confident superiority had vanished, replaced by a hesitant, almost fearful expression. She paused at the curtain separating first class from economy, hesitating for just a moment. A deep breath steadied her slightly, but her pulse still pounded loudly in her ears. With trembling fingers, she pushed the curtain aside and stepped into the tightly packed economy section. The contrast between the elegant first-class cabin and the crowded, noisy economy seats was sharp, a visual representation of the humiliation she herself had inflicted upon young Sophia Bennett. Sophia sat quietly at her seat near the back of the plane, staring thoughtfully out the window, lost in her thoughts. When she felt Veronica approaching, she turned slowly, meeting the flight attendant's gaze with surprising calmness. Sophia's eyes were mature beyond her years, clear and composed, a stark contrast to Veronica's flustered appearance. Veronica stopped next to Sophia's seat, feeling the eyes of every passenger on her. The air grew dense with tension, whispers fading into complete silence as everyone watched the scene unfold. Veronica cleared her throat, struggling to summon the courage required of her. "Miss Bennett," Veronica began shakily, her voice weak, almost inaudible. She paused briefly, gathering herself. "I would like to formally apologize for what happened earlier. It appears there was a misunderstanding and you were wrongly removed from your assigned seat. Please accept my sincere apologies." Her voice cracked slightly, but the apology came out clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Veronica bowed her head slightly, a gesture she hoped would display humility, but to Sophia it appeared shallow and forced. The silence deepened, no one spoke, No one even breathed loudly as Sophia regarded the woman standing before her. The girl's clear, steady voice broke the silence. "Ms. Mitchell, are you apologizing because there was genuinely a misunderstanding or because you discriminated against me?" Veronica's eyes widened in shock. Her carefully prepared apology fell apart instantly, shattered by a 10-year-old's devastating question. Sophia had pinpointed the exact truth, a truth Veronica desperately wished to conceal from the passengers who now watched, with a mix of shock, curiosity, and condemnation. Sophia calmly continued, her voice gentle yet powerful. "I showed you my ticket clearly, yet you chose not to believe me. You assumed I didn't belong simply because of my age or perhaps my appearance. Is that why you're sorry? Because you realized your mistake? Or because now you must face the consequences?" Veronica opened her mouth, but no words emerged. She stood paralyzed, her face burning with shame, humiliation radiating from her in palpable waves. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmurs rising softly, some shaking their heads in quiet judgment. Before Veronica could gather enough courage to respond, a voice broke the silence from a few rows ahead. It was Franklin Montgomery, the well-dressed businessman who had earlier watched quietly from first class. Now, standing with a newfound determination, he spoke clearly enough for all to hear. "I witnessed the entire incident from the beginning," Franklin declared firmly, his eyes locked onto Veronica. "There was no misunderstanding. You deliberately singled out this young girl. You didn't question anyone else in first class, only her." Veronica turned sharply, panic gripping her chest. I didn't mean," she began weakly. "You did mean," Franklin interrupted, his voice stern and unyielding. "We all saw it. This young lady was calm, respectful, and showed you her valid ticket multiple times. Yet you humiliated her publicly, without even bothering to check the passenger manifest." Murmurs erupted among the passengers, whispers of outrage and disbelief rippling through the cabin. Veronica felt trapped, exposed under the crushing weight of truth. She could no longer deny. Franklin pressed on relentlessly, fueled by indignation. "Would you have done this if she looked different? Older, perhaps, or dressed in a way you found acceptable? You didn't question me or anyone else in first class. You targeted a child, assumed she was lying, and chose to humiliate her." Passengers nodded in agreement, their expressions hardening. A mother holding her baby in the nearby row shook her head sadly, disgust apparent in her eyes. Another passenger muttered angrily, "Shameful." Sophia sat silently, watching Veronica carefully. There was no joy or triumph on her young face, only a quiet sadness mixed with dignity. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt, allowing Veronica to face the gravity of her actions. Veronica looked around desperately, seeking any sign of sympathy, but found only judgment. The cabin felt unbearably hot, her uniform collar suddenly tight, choking her. Her breathing grew rapid, shallow, and tears she fought desperately to hide blurred her vision. Captain Donovan's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom, firm and authoritative. "Miss Mitchell, please escort Miss Bennett back to her assigned seat immediately. Let me remind all cabin crew that Bennett Airlines will never tolerate discrimination or mistreatment of passengers." Veronica flinched visibly at the captain's stern announcement. Gathering the shattered remnants of her dignity, she finally forced herself to respond quietly, painfully. "You're right. My actions were inappropriate, and I deeply apologize, Miss Bennett. Please allow me to return you to your seat." Sophia slowly rose, meeting Veronica's tear-filled gaze. Without anger or bitterness, she nodded calmly, lifting her backpack onto her shoulder. But the message was already clear to everyone aboard. Veronica's authority, her reputation, had been irreparably damaged. As Sophia walked quietly back toward first class, Veronica followed behind, shoulders slumped in utter humiliation. Passengers watched with a mix of sympathy for Sophia and condemnation for the flight attendant who had abused her authority. Franklin Montgomery, resuming his seat, cast a reassuring glance towards Sophia, silently expressing his support and admiration. Sophia reached her original seat, quietly settled herself, and looked once more out the spacious window. Yet she felt no satisfaction, no victory, only a sense of quiet dignity restored. She had stood up for herself in a way that no child should ever have to, but in doing so, she had demonstrated strength far beyond her years. Veronica silently retreated toward the galley, her head bowed, the confident stride she once had entirely erased. As she disappeared from view, a heavy silence settled once more across the cabin, a profound reminder to all aboard that, even in the quiet skies, justice and dignity must always prevail. As the plane touched down gently onto the runway, a quiet, tense atmosphere lingered in the cabin. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign felt unusually loud, jolting Veronica Mitchell from her dazed thoughts. Her heart sank further with each passing second, aware that the humiliation she'd experienced mid-flight was likely only the beginning of something far worse. She had spent the remaining hours of the flight in anxious silence, hiding away in the galley, feeling each curious glance from passengers as sharp as a physical blow. Passengers rose slowly from their seats, murmuring softly about what they'd witnessed, eyes glancing towards Sophia Bennett, who was quietly gathering her belongings in first class. Sophia kept her composure, looking serene and dignified despite the emotional toll she'd endured earlier. Nearby, Franklin Montgomery nodded quietly to her, a gesture of respect. Veronica, meanwhile, felt as if all eyes were on her, eyes filled with silent judgment and disdain. She stood shakily near the galley, adjusting her uniform repeatedly as though it might somehow restore the authority she'd lost. The reality of the situation tightened like a noose around her throat, making each breath difficult. Finally, the cabin door swung open, and Veronica forced herself to put one foot forward, preparing to escape the torturous environment she had created. Just as she approached the aircraft door, however, she froze. Standing at the entrance, framed against the open door of the plane, was Alexander Bennett himself. The owner of Bennett Airlines was a formidable figure, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit, radiating calm authority and quiet intensity. His expression was cold, stern, and unwavering, his eyes fixed firmly upon Veronica. The flight attendant's mouth went dry, a chill racing down her spine. Her mind screamed for her to move, to speak, to do something, but she remained rooted to the spot, utterly paralyzed. Alexander took a deliberate step forward, each movement slow and measured, emphasizing his power and control over the situation. Passengers stopped abruptly, a hushed tension rippling through the cabin as everyone turned to watch. Smartphones quietly emerged from pockets and purses, discreetly recording every second of the confrontation. "Miss Mitchell," Alexander's voice was quiet, yet it resonated powerfully through the aircraft, carrying a tone of devastating authority. "I trust you understand why I'm here." Veronica tried to swallow, her throat constricted, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Mr. Bennett, I tried to explain." "Save your explanations," Alexander interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through her weak protests effortlessly. "Your discriminatory actions today against my daughter have crossed every line of professional decency, corporate values, and basic human dignity. You have humiliated a child, my daughter, and by extension disgraced my airline and what it stands for." Veronica attempted to form a response, but Alexander silenced her again, his voice growing even colder. "I am here to inform you personally that you are immediately suspended and will face legal consequences. Bennett Airlines will file charges against you and any other individual complicit for discrimination, violation of company policies, and emotional distress inflicted upon my daughter. Your employment ends here." Gasps echoed through the plane, whispers erupting amongst passengers who had already gathered near the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Veronica's knees nearly buckled beneath her, her vision blurring as the full weight of Alexander's words crushed her last remnants of pride. Before she could utter another sound, Alexander turned slightly toward two uniformed security officers standing quietly behind him. "Please escort Miss Mitchell from the aircraft immediately," he instructed firmly. "Ensure that she cooperates fully." Passengers parted quickly, making way as the security officers approached Veronica, taking her gently but firmly by the arms. The humiliation was absolute, her authority obliterated before the very passengers she had once commanded. As they guided her toward the exit, Veronica glanced desperately around the cabin, only to find cold expressions staring back at her, faces filled with judgment, disgust, and disappointment. In first class, Sophia watched silently, her heart heavy but resolute. She didn't smile or feel satisfaction in Veronica's downfall, only a quiet reassurance that justice had been served. Alexander met his daughter's eyes briefly, giving her a soft nod of reassurance and pride. She returned the nod, understanding that this wasn't vengeance, it was accountability. As Veronica descended the aircraft's steps onto the tarmac, she saw a throng of airport employees and passengers gathered around, smartphones raised and filming. She shielded her face instinctively, but it was too late. Within moments, videos of her humiliating escort spread rapidly across social media. Notifications flooded phones, posts were shared relentlessly, hashtags condemning her behavior quickly trended online. Bennett Airline scandal. Veronica Mitchell exposed. No room for discrimination. Media outlets seized the moment, broadcasting the incident repeatedly on every available channel. Within hours, Veronica Mitchell's name was known internationally, not as a respected professional, but as a symbol of discrimination, arrogance, and injustice. Standing amid the chaos of the tarmac, she was escorted swiftly toward a waiting security vehicle, cameras flashing incessantly around her. News crews clamored for her response, shouting pointed questions that struck deeper into her already damaged reputation. "Ms. Mitchell, can you explain your discriminatory actions against a child?" "Veronica, are you aware that Alexander Bennett himself has vowed legal action against you? How do you respond to the overwhelming public condemnation?" She was silent, head lowered, dignity shattered. The doors to the security vehicle closed heavily behind her, shutting out the world, but unable to erase the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, aboard the plane, Alexander Bennett stepped aside gracefully, allowing passengers to disembark quietly. As they passed, many murmured quiet thanks and nods of approval, clearly moved by his swift intervention. Franklin Montgomery shook Alexander's hand warmly, voicing gratitude for the decisive stand taken. Sophia approached her father quietly, clutching her small backpack. Alexander gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Sophia nodded, a small, thoughtful smile appearing on her lips. "I'm okay, Dad. Thank you." Alexander sighed, relief and pride mingling within him. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You were incredibly brave today, Sophia. I promise you, no one in our airline will ever experience such treatment again." Together, father and daughter stepped onto the tarmac, cameras capturing their dignified exit. Their calm composure was a striking contrast to the spectacle that had unfolded moments earlier. Bennett Airlines issued an immediate official statement reaffirming their commitment to equality and dignity for all passengers, making it clear Veronica Mitchell's behavior was an isolated, yet completely unacceptable incident. As Alexander and Sophia left the airport behind, they knew the worst was over for them. But for Veronica Mitchell, the storm had only just begun. Her reputation lay in ruins, her career shattered, dignity lost to public scorn and judgment. Above all, the events of that day had made clear one critical truth. At Bennett Airlines, discrimination would never again be tolerated, and justice, no matter how painful, would always prevail. Veronica Mitchell's life had turned into a nightmare overnight. Every television channel, newspaper, and online news portal broadcasted her disgraceful exit from Bennett Airlines Flight 307. Within days, her reputation had disintegrated. Her social media flooded with angry comments, condemning hashtags, and hateful messages. The woman who once took pride in her authority and professionalism was now reduced to a mere shadow, hiding within the confines of her apartment, consumed by humiliation and remorse. 2 weeks after the incident, a letter arrived at Veronica's doorstep. Official stationery bearing the stark, unmistakable emblem of Bennett Airlines. She read it with trembling hands, each word carving deeper into her already broken spirit. A mandatory appearance before the Executive Ethics Committee, chaired by none other than Jonathan Caldwell, Senior Director of Operations at Bennett Airlines. This would decide her professional fate. Upon rejoining the group, she underlined and emphasized, upon undercutting the sentimental underscore 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 under underscore under underscore under underscore under underscore underscore underscore. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and unforgiving, mirroring Veronica's heart. As she stepped into the towering corporate headquarters, familiar hallways and conference rooms felt alien, hostile even. Colleagues she once greeted warmly now turned their heads, whispering in hushed tones as she passed. The air was heavy with judgment and silent condemnation. The hearing room was vast, sterile, and intimidating. At the far end sat Jonathan Caldwell, an imposing figure whose piercing gaze met hers with unwavering scrutiny. Flanking him were senior executives, all watching with cool, detached expressions as Veronica quietly took her seat, heart pounding relentlessly in her chest. Jonathan began, voice clear, commanding attention effortlessly. Ms. Mitchell, we're gathered today to address your actions aboard Flight BA307, which led to the public humiliation of a young passenger, Sophia Bennett. Your behavior not only breached company policy, but severely damaged our reputation as an airline committed to equality and dignity. He paused deliberately, allowing his words to hang heavy in the room. Veronica lowered her eyes, hands folded tightly in her lap, heart racing with anxiety and shame. Unfortunately, Jonathan continued gravely, this is not an isolated incident. Veronica's head snapped upward, shock flooding her features. Jonathan opened a thick folder, meticulously placing documents before him. According to our records, he announced firmly, you have accumulated multiple official complaints from passengers over the past 2 years. Complaints citing discriminatory practices and inappropriate judgments based on passengers' appearances, backgrounds, and perceived socio-economic status. Veronica felt a sharp pang of dread pierce her chest, her mind spinning uncontrollably. I wasn't aware of those complaints, she stammered weakly. Jonathan shook his head, disappointment clearly etched in his features. The complaints existed, Ms. Mitchell. Regrettably, previous management failed to address them with sufficient urgency. But make no mistake, this committee will not overlook them. He turned to face the executives seated beside him, all nodding solemnly in agreement. Veronica's stomach churned violently, realizing the magnitude of her actions, the depth of her negligence. Your discriminatory attitudes and behaviors have demonstrated a clear, troubling pattern, Jonathan declared coldly, his words landing with devastating weight. Frankly, your continued employment with Bennett Airlines is under serious scrutiny. Before we reach a final determination, however, do you have anything to say in your defense? Veronica stared helplessly at her trembling hands, tears welling painfully in her eyes. Words failed her. She knew now, without a doubt, she had no defense, only guilt and deep regret. Jonathan sighed heavily, recognizing her silence as resignation. This hearing is adjourned for today. The board will announce a final decision within 72 hours. You are dismissed. Underscore, 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 SWRARPANARC. SW. 3 days passed slowly, each minute a torturous reflection of past mistakes. Veronica couldn't sleep, haunted by memories of Sophia's calm, accusing gaze, Alexander's cold fury, and Franklin Montgomery's condemning voice. Her pride had blinded her to the reality of her prejudice, and now, stripped of all excuses, she knew she had to face the truth. Finally, she took a courageous step. Gathering her resolve, she composed a humble letter to Alexander Bennett, requesting an urgent private meeting with him and his daughter Sophia. The response came swiftly, surprisingly generous given the circumstances. Inviting her to meet at Bennett Airline's main office that same afternoon. As Veronica entered Alexander Bennett's private office, she felt the weight of countless eyes following her. Yet all that truly mattered now were those of Alexander and Sophia, sitting quietly behind an elegant desk. Alexander's expression was cautious, stern yet fair, while Sophia regarded her calmly, showing no anger or bitterness. Standing before them, Veronica's voice quivered noticeably, every word wrung from her soul. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Bennett. I came here not to offer excuses, because none exist. I failed both of you terribly. I failed as a professional, but more than that, I failed as a person." She paused, gathering strength to continue, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "I now understand the pain my prejudice caused, not only Sophia but others as well. I realize my attitudes were rooted in ignorance, pride, and bias. For that, I am deeply, genuinely sorry." Alexander remained silent, watching her intently. Sophia, however, nodded gently, encouraging Veronica to go on. Her voice cracked again with emotion. "I've lost everything, my career, reputation, dignity. But that's fair. My punishment fits my actions. Yet, I'm here today to ask you both, humbly, for a final opportunity. Not just to save my job, but to save myself from the prejudiced person I've become. Please, allow me one last chance to change, to learn, and to somehow make amends." Then, unexpectedly to all, Veronica slowly sank onto her knees before Sophia and Alexander, a gesture that showed complete submission to the truth, stripping away the remnants of her ego. "Please," she whispered brokenly, "forgive me." A heavy silence filled the room, only broken by Veronica's quiet sobbing. Alexander glanced briefly at Sophia, allowing his daughter to speak first. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "Ms. Mitchell," Sophia said gently yet firmly, "I don't want revenge. I only wanted fairness, respect, and dignity, something everyone deserves. If you truly mean what you've said today, I'm willing to believe you. But only actions, not words alone, can prove you've truly changed." Alexander nodded in agreement. Sophia is right. Real change demands real effort. If you're genuine in your remorse, Bennett Airlines is prepared to provide extensive diversity and anti-discrimination training. You won't retain your senior position, of course. You'll begin again, at the lowest ranks, working directly with passengers, facing the challenges you once dismissed. Consider this your chance, your only chance, to truly redeem yourself. Veronica lifted her head slowly, hope flickering faintly in her teary eyes. "Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes." As Veronica rose shakily to her feet, Alexander added softly yet firmly, "Don't misunderstand, Ms. Mitchell. This is not charity. This is accountability. Only your future actions will determine if you truly deserve forgiveness." "I understand," Veronica replied humbly, feeling gratitude and shame mingling within her. As she stepped out of Alexander's office, Veronica understood clearly the road ahead would be painful, humbling, and uncertain. She would endure the stares, the judgment, and the relentless demand to prove her sincerity. Yet, for the first time, she felt genuinely hopeful. Not hopeful about regaining prestige or authority, but hopeful about becoming a better person, one who could confront the darkness of prejudice and transform it into genuine empathy. This would be her path, a path she knew she had to walk alone, guided only by the painful yet vital lessons she'd learned from a brave little girl named Sophia Bennett. Silence filled Alexander Bennett's office, heavy and charged with anticipation. Veronica Mitchell stood quietly, her face pale and strained, awaiting judgment. Her heart pounded fiercely, the steady rhythm echoing painfully in her ears. Opposite her, Alexander sat calm and composed, his gaze steady but unreadable. Beside him sat his daughter Sophia, thoughtful and composed beyond her 10 years. The next few moments held Veronica's entire future within them, and she knew it. Alexander turned gently toward Sophia, speaking softly but firmly. "Sophia, what happened on that plane affected you the most. It would only be fair that you decide Ms. Mitchell's future." Veronica's breath caught sharply. Her entire career now rested on the choice of a 10-year-old child, a child she had so unfairly humiliated. The irony was agonizing, yet undeniably just. Sophia glanced briefly at her father, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, then nodded slowly, accepting this heavy responsibility. Sophia turned quietly, her clear, intelligent eyes meeting Veronica's anxious gaze. Her expression wasn't angry or vengeful, just deeply thoughtful. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched on, tense and thick with meaning. Veronica trembled slightly, her mind racing. She wanted desperately to plead her case, beg Sophia for mercy, explain again how sorry she was, but she held back, knowing this was Sophia's moment. Sophia deserved to make this choice without interruption. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice calm and measured, mature beyond her years. "Miss Mitchell, when you forced me out of my seat and humiliated me in front of everyone, you didn't just make me feel embarrassed, you made me feel like I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. It hurt more than anything anyone has ever done to me." Veronica's eyes welled with fresh tears, shame stabbing painfully at her heart. "But," Sophia continued quietly, "my father always taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about helping people understand their mistakes and letting them learn from them. Revenge might feel good, but it doesn't change anything. I don't want revenge. I want something better." She paused briefly, glancing at her father for reassurance. Alexander nodded encouragingly, pride glowing warmly in his eyes. Sophia looked directly into Veronica's eyes, her voice gentle yet resolute. "I believe you mean it when you say you're sorry. But words aren't enough. You need to understand exactly how I felt. You need to understand what it's like to be judged, dismissed, and disrespected." Veronica swallowed hard, nodding quickly, desperate for a chance. "I will. I promise." Sophia held up her hand gently, stilling Veronica's anxious response. "If you really want to show you've changed, then you have to start over. Not from the top, but from the bottom. You have to experience what passengers feel every day, being ignored, judged, treated unfairly." She paused, her voice firming, stronger now. "If you truly accept responsibility, you'll willingly give up your senior position. You'll start again in the lowest position, handling the hardest tasks. You'll experience firsthand how it feels to serve others humbly and with dignity. You'll feel how painful it is when someone treats you like you treated me." Veronica stood frozen, absorbing the enormity of Sophia's proposal. It meant surrendering everything she'd ever achieved. Her position, status, authority, all gone instantly. Yet, as she stood there, Veronica realized this was precisely what true redemption demanded. Anything less would merely be empty words, meaningless apologies. Sophia watched her carefully, quietly waiting. Alexander said nothing, clearly allowing Sophia's wise and balanced judgment to stand without interference. Finally, Veronica spoke, her voice low but unwavering. "I accept your condition. I know it won't be easy. But I need this. I need to fully understand my mistakes so I can truly change. Thank you for giving me this chance." Sophia's expression softened slightly, her young face radiating a maturity that deeply touched Veronica. "I hope you'll remember this feeling every day," Sophia said quietly. "And I hope it makes you kinder." Alexander leaned forward now, addressing Veronica directly. "Miss Mitchell, this is not forgiveness yet. It's merely an opportunity. How you act in the days, weeks, and months ahead will determine whether or not you truly deserve redemption." "I understand completely, Mr. Bennett," Veronica replied sincerely. "I won't waste this opportunity, I promise." Alexander rose gracefully from his chair, extending his hand toward Veronica. She hesitated briefly, then shook his hand, the firm, respectful grip signifying a mutual understanding. "I hope you keep that promise," Alexander remarked solemnly. Veronica turned next to Sophia, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Sophia, thank you. Your kindness, your dignity. I don't deserve them, but I'm grateful for the lesson you've taught me." Sophia stood up quietly, stepping closer. She extended her small hand bravely toward Veronica. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Just make sure you use yours wisely." Veronica shook the girl's hand softly, humbled beyond words by Sophia's maturity and compassion. At that moment, Veronica knew she'd never again judge another person so carelessly. The painful humiliation she'd experienced had burned away her arrogance, and Sophia's grace had offered her a new beginning, a genuine path toward redemption. Alexander and Sophia watched silently as Veronica turned, walking slowly toward the exit. As the door closed gently behind her, Sophia leaned thoughtfully against her father's arm. "You did well," Alexander murmured softly, pride evident in his voice. "That wasn't easy." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Everyone makes mistakes. It's what we do afterward that truly matters." Outside, Veronica walked slowly toward the elevators, her heart heavy but hopeful. The road ahead would be painful and humbling. Yet now, finally, she had clarity. Her pride no longer blinded her. The harsh lessons she'd learned had opened her eyes permanently. As the elevator doors opened, Veronica stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor, the lowest point, symbolizing the start of her new journey. But this time, she would rise differently, guided not by pride, but by humility, empathy, and genuine respect for every person she encountered. Sophia Bennett had taught her more than any training course ever could. In that young girl's wisdom and dignity, Veronica had finally found the truth she needed, that genuine strength comes not from authority, but from compassion. As the elevator descended, Veronica silently vowed never to forget the powerful lessons Sophia had taught her. It was time to begin again, not from the top, but from the bottom, exactly where she belonged. And perhaps, someday, she would truly earn forgiveness. Veronica Mitchell returned to Bennett Airlines a changed woman. Once a proud and authoritative senior flight attendant, she now stepped through the doors in the uniform of a junior trainee. Her badge no longer bore titles of leadership. Instead, it displayed simply, Veronica Mitchell, Customer Service Trainee. It was a constant reminder of her humility, a symbol of both her downfall and her determination to rise again, this time guided by empathy and integrity rather than power and pride. Each morning, she woke before dawn to report for training, performing tasks she'd once deemed beneath her dignity. She cleaned cabins, prepared coffee, distributed blankets, and quietly absorbed the subtle disrespect or impatience that some passengers displayed. Now, instead of feeling irritation, she experienced a quiet, reflective empathy. Every moment served as a poignant reminder of the humiliation she'd once inflicted upon young Sophia Bennett and others like her. In the afternoons, Veronica attended intensive courses on diversity, equality, and anti-discrimination, sessions required by Alexander Bennett as part of her redemption plan. At first, she attended reluctantly, ashamed and defensive. But gradually, as the instructors shared powerful, personal stories of prejudice, humiliation, and courage, Veronica found herself genuinely moved. She began participating actively, openly confronting her biases, admitting her past mistakes, and embracing difficult conversations about race, class, and dignity. She met passengers daily who challenged her new convictions, forcing her to practice patience, humility, and empathy. Each encounter reshaped her heart. She saw clearly how easily biases could creep in, how quickly assumptions were made based on appearance or circumstance. Veronica vowed never again to let herself slip into old prejudices. Weeks turned into months, and gradually, colleagues noticed the genuine change in her behavior. Those initially skeptical of her intentions saw firsthand her sincere dedication. They watched Veronica step forward openly, speaking passionately during training sessions, sharing her experience candidly, urging others never to repeat her mistakes. Slowly, she began rebuilding trust, not through words alone, but through daily, consistent actions. One afternoon, Veronica attended an employee forum on discrimination hosted personally by Alexander Bennett. The large conference room buzzed with anticipation. Employees gathered to hear the airline's new initiative, an ambitious campaign to eliminate bias entirely from Bennett Airlines. Veronica took a seat quietly in the back row, heart filled with nervous anticipation. Alexander stepped to the podium, his presence commanding yet warm. Beside him, standing poised and confident despite her youth, was Sophia. Employees applauded respectfully, aware of the profound meaning behind her presence. Alexander spoke firmly. "Recent events have made it painfully clear that we have much to learn. It's not enough to simply say we oppose discrimination. We must actively prevent it." Beginning immediately, Bennett Airlines introduces the Fly with Respect campaign, a comprehensive anti-discrimination program, mandatory diversity training for all staff, and an anonymous, secure system to report any instances of bias. Discrimination will no longer be tolerated in any form. Sophia stepped forward gently, taking the microphone confidently. Her clear voice resonated powerfully across the room. "My experience taught me how deeply prejudice can hurt someone, especially when it comes from people we trust, like those working for an airline. But it also taught me something more important. Every person deserves dignity, respect, and fairness, no matter how they look, where they come from, or how young or old they are." She paused briefly, glancing briefly toward the back of the room, her eyes meeting Veronica's gaze momentarily with kindness and quiet encouragement. "I want Bennett Airlines to become a place where passengers never have to fear being judged or disrespected again. It's our job, each of us, to ensure that happens." The room burst into heartfelt applause. Employees stood, inspired by Sophia's words, proud of their airline's commitment to true equality. Veronica clapped earnestly from her seat, profoundly grateful for the transformative journey Sophia had sparked within her. As the applause faded, Alexander took the microphone once more. "Change isn't easy, but it starts with acknowledgement and continues with action. I believe we have someone here today who truly embodies that spirit of genuine change. Veronica Mitchell, would you please come forward?" Veronica's breath caught sharply. She hesitated, heart racing, feeling every eye upon her. Slowly, she rose from her chair, walking toward the stage, each step both terrifying and healing. Reaching the front, she faced the crowd bravely, standing humbly before colleagues who once witnessed her arrogance and now witnessed her transformation. Alexander spoke gently, respectfully. Miss Mitchell has shown us that true change is possible. She has openly confronted her mistakes, chosen accountability, and demonstrated remarkable courage by returning here in humility to begin again. Today, I'd like her to share briefly about her journey. Veronica stepped forward nervously, her voice trembling but genuine. Months ago, I made a choice that harmed Sophia and damaged this airline's reputation. It wasn't just a mistake, it revealed a pattern of prejudice I'd never faced within myself. I was wrong, deeply wrong. But I've learned that true respect means seeing every passenger as equally valuable, deserving dignity and kindness. Sophia Bennett taught me that. I promise each of you I will never forget this lesson. I will spend the rest of my career fighting discrimination rather than contributing to it. As Veronica finished, the room filled once again with applause. Not celebratory applause for her, but acknowledgement of the courage it took to stand vulnerably before them. Sophia stepped closer, offering her hand in genuine reconciliation. Veronica accepted gratefully, tears shining in her eyes as the room cheered warmly. This moment symbolized not merely forgiveness, but hope. In the days following the forum, Veronica's story became a powerful testament across Bennett Airlines. Employees embraced the new anti-discrimination policies, openly discussing biases and prejudices once kept silent. Veronica became an unexpected advocate, mentoring younger employees, leading training workshops, and openly sharing her story. Gradually, through humility and sincere effort, she became respected, not for authority, but for genuine empathy and courage. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett's role expanded as she became the public face of Bennett Airlines' Fly with Respect initiative. She appeared in commercials, posters, and social media campaigns, advocating respect and equality. Passengers worldwide recognized her story, inspired by her strength, wisdom, and remarkable maturity. Under Alexander's dedicated leadership, Bennett Airlines earned an international reputation as a progressive airline dedicated sincerely to dignity, equality, and respect. Months later, during another crowded training session, a newly hired flight attendant approached Veronica timidly. "Miss Mitchell," the young attendant whispered shyly, "your story inspired me to apply here. You taught me that even when we fail, we can still choose to do better." Veronica smiled warmly, her heart swelling with quiet pride and gratitude. "Thank you. Remember, the hardest lessons often teach us the most." As the attendant walked away, Veronica thought quietly of Sophia, the child who taught her humility, dignity, and the true meaning of strength. Though Veronica had once wronged Sophia deeply, it was ultimately that painful mistake that allowed Veronica to genuinely change. The journey had been painful, humbling, and difficult, but it was exactly the journey she had needed. Bennett Airlines soared forward, not simply because they had eliminated discrimination in policy, but because they had changed the hearts of employees like Veronica. Sophia's quiet courage and dignity had transformed the entire organization, creating lasting change far beyond one flight, one passenger, or one mistake. In the end, justice had been served not through revenge, but through redemption. Veronica Mitchell returned to Bennett Airlines a changed woman. Once a proud and authoritative senior flight attendant, she now stepped through the doors in the uniform of a junior trainee. Her badge no longer bore titles of leadership. Instead, it displayed simply, "Veronica Mitchell, Customer Service Trainee." It was a constant reminder of her humility, a symbol of both her downfall and her determination to rise again, this time guided by empathy and integrity rather than power and pride. Each morning she woke before dawn to report for training, performing tasks she'd once deemed beneath her dignity. She cleaned cabins, prepared coffee, distributed blankets, and quietly absorbed the subtle disrespect or impatience that some passengers displayed. Now, instead of feeling irritation, she experienced a quiet, reflective empathy. Every moment served as a poignant reminder of the humiliation she'd once inflicted upon young Sophia Bennett and others like her. In the afternoons, Veronica attended intensive courses on diversity, equality, and anti-discrimination, sessions required by Bennett as part of her redemption plan. At first, she attended reluctantly, ashamed and defensive. But gradually, as the instructors shared powerful, personal stories of prejudice, humiliation, and courage, Veronica found herself genuinely moved. She began participating actively, openly confronting her biases, admitting her past mistakes, and embracing difficult conversations about race, class, and dignity. She met passengers daily who challenged her new convictions, forcing her to practice patience, humility, and empathy. Each encounter reshaped her heart. She saw clearly how easily biases could creep in, how quickly assumptions were made based on appearance or circumstance. Veronica vowed never again to let herself slip into old prejudices. Weeks turned into months, and gradually colleagues noticed the genuine change in her behavior. Those initially skeptical of her intentions saw firsthand her sincere dedication. They watched Veronica step forward openly, speaking passionately during training sessions, sharing her experience candidly, urging others never to repeat her mistakes. Slowly, she began rebuilding trust, not through words alone, but through daily, consistent actions. One afternoon, Veronica attended an employee forum on discrimination hosted personally by Bennett. The large conference room buzzed with anticipation. Employees gathered to hear the airline's new initiative, an ambitious campaign to eliminate bias entirely from Bennett Airlines. Veronica took a seat quietly in the back row, heart filled with nervous anticipation. Alexander stepped to the podium, his presence commanding yet warm. Beside him, standing poised and confident despite her youth, was Sophia. Employees applauded respectfully, aware of the profound meaning behind her presence. Alexander spoke firmly. Recent events have made it painfully clear that we have much to learn. It's not enough to simply say we oppose discrimination. We must actively prevent it. Beginning immediately, Bennett Airlines introduces the Fly with Respect campaign, a comprehensive anti-discrimination program, mandatory diversity training for all staff, and an anonymous, secure system to report any instances of bias. Discrimination will no longer be tolerated in any form. Sophia stepped forward gently, taking the microphone confidently. Her clear voice resonated powerfully across the room. My experience taught me how deeply prejudice can hurt someone, especially when it comes from people we trust, like those working for an airline. But it also taught me something more important. Every person deserves dignity, respect, and fairness, no matter how they look, where they come from, or how young or old they are. She paused briefly, glancing briefly toward the back of the room, her eyes meeting Veronica's gaze momentarily with kindness and quiet encouragement. I want Bennett Airlines to become a place where passengers never have to fear being judged or disrespected again. It's our job, each of us, to ensure that happens. The room burst into heartfelt applause. Employees stood, inspired by Sophia's words, proud of their airline's commitment to true equality. Veronica clapped earnestly from her seat, profoundly grateful for the transformative journey Sophia had sparked within her. As the applause faded, Alexander took the microphone once more. Change isn't easy, but it starts with acknowledgement and continues with action. I believe we have someone here today who truly embodies that spirit of genuine change. Veronica Mitchell, would you please come forward? Veronica's breath caught sharply. She hesitated, heart racing, feeling every eye upon her. Slowly she rose from her chair, walking toward the stage, each step both terrifying and healing. Reaching the front, she faced the crowd bravely, standing humbly before colleagues who once witnessed her arrogance and now witnessed her transformation. Alexander spoke gently, respectfully. Miss Mitchell has shown us that true change is possible. She has openly confronted her mistakes, chosen accountability, and demonstrated remarkable courage by returning here in humility to begin again. Today, I'd like her to share briefly about her journey. Veronica stepped forward nervously, her voice trembling but genuine. Months ago, I made a choice that harmed Sophia and damaged this airline's reputation. It wasn't just a mistake. It revealed a pattern of prejudice I'd never faced within myself. I was wrong, deeply wrong. But I've learned that true respect means seeing every passenger as equally valuable, deserving dignity and kindness. Sophia Bennett taught me that. I promise each of you I will never forget this lesson. I will spend the rest of my career fighting discrimination rather than contributing to it. As Veronica finished, the room filled once again with applause. Not celebratory applause for her, but acknowledgement of the courage it took to stand vulnerably before them. Sophia stepped closer, offering her hand in genuine reconciliation. Veronica accepted gratefully, tears shining in her eyes as the room cheered warmly. This moment symbolized not merely forgiveness, but hope. In the days following the forum, Veronica's story became a powerful testament across Bennett Airlines. Employees embraced the new anti-discrimination policies, openly discussing biases and prejudices once kept silent. Veronica became an unexpected advocate, mentoring younger employees, leading training workshops, and openly sharing her story. Gradually, through humility and sincere effort, she became respected, not for authority, but for genuine empathy and courage. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett's role expanded as she became the public face of Bennett Airlines' Fly with Respect initiative. She appeared in commercials, posters, and social media campaigns advocating respect and equality. Passengers worldwide recognized her story, inspired by her strength, wisdom, and remarkable maturity. Under Alexander's dedicated leadership, Bennett Airlines earned an international reputation as a progressive airline dedicated sincerely to dignity, equality, and respect. Months later, during another crowded training session, a newly hired flight attendant approached Veronica timidly. "Mrs. Mitchell," the young attendant whispered shyly, "your story inspired me to apply here. You taught me that even when we fail, we can still choose to do better." Veronica smiled warmly, her heart swelling with quiet pride and gratitude. "Thank you. Remember, the hardest lessons often teach us the most." As the attendant walked away, Veronica thought quietly of Sophia, the child who taught her humility, dignity, and the true meaning of strength. Though Veronica had once wronged Sophia deeply, it was ultimately that painful mistake that allowed Veronica to genuinely change. The journey had been painful, humbling, and difficult, but it was exactly the journey she had needed. Bennett Airlines soared forward, not simply because they had eliminated discrimination in policy, but because they had changed the hearts of employees like Veronica. Sophia's quiet courage and dignity had transformed the entire organization, creating lasting change far beyond one flight, one passenger, or one mistake. In the end, justice had been served not through revenge, but through redemption.